A black man once stood in the center of a boxing ring in 1910, smiling, while 20,000 white spectators waited for him to be broken. They had not come merely for sport. They had come for restoration, for reassurance, for the reinstallation of a racial order that had trembled for 2 unbearable years. They wanted proof that the natural hierarchy of the world, their world, still stood firm. The man before them had already done the unthinkable. Now they demanded that he be humbled. Before long, thousands of whites roared as their towering white champion stalked forward, their great white hope, the chosen redeemer of racial pride they had been counting on. But the black man just laughed. He leaned casually against the ropes and laughed even louder. He dodged punches with the looseness of a dancer and the patience of a chess master. Round after round, he toyed with the man sent to destroy him. And when he struck, sharp, precise, humiliating, it was not just flesh that absorbed the impact. It was an idea. By the time the final blow landed and the great white hope sagged under the weight of the unavoidable, crumpling to the canvas, something far greater had fallen with him. The white pride, the man who did this, was Jack Johnson, and America would never forgive him for it. To understand why Johnson had America terribly shook up to her roots, one must first understand the America this young black man was born into back then. Like someone simply puts, Jack Johnson was simply the greatest original, baddest man on the planet. Even Mike Tyson has this to say about him.
That's where Ali got his courage from. He watched Jack Johnson documentaries. He said, I'm nothing compared to Jack Johnson. Listen. In 1908, you got lynched for looking at white women, reckless eyeballing. He married 3 of them. Wow. I don't put myself in the league of Jack Johnson. Jack Johnson's fighting in the ring, and there's 75,000 people saying, I'm going to kill you if you hurt him. You know, this is what they're saying. In the,
while he's trying to fight.
You know what he's doing? Oh, and he's beating that boom. Oh, he's so beautiful. I'm gonna send him to you real nice. Boom, boom. And he's talking to the guy's wife. How you doing, Miss Jeffries? And then boom, beat the guy's ass. And if you ever watch him fight, you know, he look at the crowd. He's always smiling because they're cursing at him like a dog. You're such a tough guy.
And if you think that was all, listen to what Muhammad Ali had to say about him then.
Jack Johnson was a black man back when white people lived Negroes on weekends. They would send him letters saying, you fighting a white man, if you knock him out, we'll kill you. He said, just kill my black brothers, I'm gonna knock this white man cold. I know I'm bad, but he was crazy.
You heard that. That was Jack Johnson. Imagine the grossness of this dark era matched against the unbending courage of the man. Was heroic and historic at the same time. He could hear and see the white crowds raging at him, thousands of them saying they're gonna kill him. But his response with an ever-smiling face was, you may kill all my black brothers, but you see, I'm gonna knock this white man cold. Such guts was out of this world. Johnson entered the world on March 31st, 1878 in Galveston, Texas. Barely 13 years after the Civil War had ended, and emancipation had supposedly freed 4 million enslaved people. He had been born into a world that had drawn invisible borders around his destiny before he ever got to speak his first word tortured. His parents, Henry and Tina Johnson, had both been enslaved. Freedom had come, yes, but it arrived limping. Segregation laws tightening like iron bands across the South. Lynch mobs enforcing racial codes with terror, and black ambition treated as a crime. By the 1880s and 1890s, Reconstruction had collapsed. Federal troops withdrew from the South in 1877. Whites, supremacist governments regained power, and the Jim Crow era hardened into law. Black Americans were segregated from birth to burial. By 1896, The U.S. Supreme Court's decision in Plessy v. Ferguson legalized separate but equal, sanctifying segregation across schools, railroads, hospitals, and public spaces. In reality, separate meant inferior, underfunded, and humiliating. Lynching had become a public spectacle. Between 1882 and 1901 alone, over 1,700 black Americans have been lynched. Mobs gathered with picnic baskets. Photographs were sold as souvenirs amongst whites. Black men were arrested for vagrancy and leased to private businesses in systems barely distinguishable from slavery. Black women labored in white homes under constant threat of assault. Black children grew up watching their fathers step off sidewalks when white men passed. This was the order of the day, and into that suffocating air grew a boy who refused to inhale fear. Johnson's early teenage years were marked by labor, dock work, odd jobs, manual grind. Growing up in Galveston, Texas, Johnson attended 5 years of school. As a young man, Johnson was frail, though, like all of his siblings, he was expected to work. Although Johnson grew up in the South, he said the segregation was not an issue in the somewhat secluded city of Galveston, as everyone living in the 12th Ward was poor and went through the same struggles. Johnson remembers growing up with a gang of white boys in which he never felt victimized or excluded. Remembering his childhood, Johnson said,
"As I grew up, the white boys were my friends and my pals. I ate with them, played with them, and slept at their homes. Their mothers gave me cookies, and I ate at their tables. No one ever taught me that white men were superior to me."
Jack Johnson's mother, Tina, was a huge influence in Jack's life. When Jack was younger, he was known as a coward, and his sister Lucy did often protect him from bullies. After Jack came home bruised and crying, his mom warned him that if he were to get beat at school, then she would whip him worse at home. Her method was to scare him and for him to learn the lesson that he needed to protect himself. The lesson was received by Jack, as he never lost a fight to a schoolboy again. After Johnson quit school, he began a job working at the local docks. He made several other attempts at working other jobs around town, until one day he made his way to Dallas, finding work at the racetrack exercising horses. Jack stuck with this job until he found a new apprenticeship with a carriage painter by the name of Walter Lewis. Lewis enjoyed watching friends spar, and Johnson began to learn how to box. Johnson had later on in his life declared his thanks to Lewis, through whom he said he became a boxer. In the late 1800s, a shop owner in Dallas had introduced Johnson to the world of boxing, recognizing his natural physical prowess. Standing over 6 feet tall and weighing around 220 pounds, with exceptional reflexes akin to a cat, Johnson's physical attributes were ideal for this whole sport. Starting on the local boxing scene, he eventually made his way to Chicago, where he would join forces with a local promoter. At the age of 16, Johnson moved to New York City and found living arrangements with Barbados Joe Walcott, a welterweight fighter from the West Indies. Johnson again found work exercising horses for the local stable until he was fired for exhausting a horse. On his return to Galveston, he was hired as a janitor at a gym owned by German-born heavyweight fighter Herman Bernal. Johnson would eventually save enough money to buy himself boxing gloves and had begun sparring every chance he got. Galveston sports introduced him to sailors and rough men who fought for entertainment. By his late teens, he was stepping into makeshift rings in battle royals, grotesque spectacles where several black fighters were blindfolded and forced to brawl for the amusement of white audiences. He did learn two things quickly: how to survive humiliation and how to master violence. Known for smiling and talking to opponents while dominating them in the ring, he demonstrated a level of mental and physical superiority that disturbed many white spectators at the time. At one point, Johnson was arrested for brawling with a man named Davy Pearson, a grown and toughened man who accused Johnson of turning him into the police over a game of craps. When both of them were released from jail, they had met at the docks, and Johnson would beat Pearson before a large crowd. Johnson then fought in a summer boxing league against a man named John Must Have It Lee. And because prize fighting was illegal in Texas, the fight was broken up and moved to the beach, where Johnson won his first fight and a prize of $1.50. Johnson would make his debut as a professional boxer on November 1st, 1898 in Galveston, when he knocked out Charlie Brooks in the second round of a 15-round bout, billed for the Texas State or middleweight title. In his third pro fight on May 8th, 1899, he faced John Klondike Haynes, an African-American heavyweight known as the Black Hercules, in Chicago. Klondike, so called as he was considered a rarity, like the gold in the Klondike, who had declared himself the Black Heavyweight Champ, won on a technical knockout in the 5th round of a scheduled 6-rounder. On February 25th, 1901, Johnson fought Joe Choinsky in Galveston. Choinsky, a popular and experienced heavyweight, knocked out Johnson in the 3rd round. Prize fighting was illegal in Texas at the time, and they were both arrested. Bail was set at $5,000, nearly $200,000 in 2023, which neither could afford. The sheriff permitted both fighters to go home at night, so long as they agreed to spar in the jail cell, which they did. Large crowds would gather to watch the sessions, while the sheriff cashed out from the bout. After 23 days in jail, the bail of both men would be reduced to an affordable level, with a grand jury refusing to indict either of them. Johnson later stated that he did learn proper boxing skills during the jail time with Joe Choinsky. The two had become friends after that. Johnson attested that his success in boxing came from the coaching he received from Choinsky. The aging Choinsky saw natural talent and determination in Johnson and taught him the nuances of defense, stating,
"A man who can move like you should never have to take a punch."
boxing was one of the few arenas where a black man could earn money through visible excellence. But even there, a color line barred entry to the highest prize. Boxing at the turn of the 20th century was brutal theater. Heavyweight champion meant king of masculinity, symbol of national strength. But that crown had an unspoken condition. It was not meant for a black man. The prospect of an African American holding the title challenged prevailing beliefs in white superiority. Because boxing was one of the most popular sports of the era, alongside baseball and horse racing, the champion attracted significant public attention. Many white Americans opposed the idea of a black champion receiving such prominence after defeating white opponents. As a result, Johnson encountered substantial obstacles in securing a bout with the reigning heavyweight champion. Johnson would fight his way through countless battles, facing opponents who often received more pay, more press, and more protection. For years, the reigning heavyweight champion refused to fight him. The color line in boxing was as rigid as it was in schools, trains, and restaurants. Black fighters could be talented, but not supreme. The reigning heavyweight champion, James J. Jeffries, and other white champions refused to fight black contenders. Johnson would chase them relentlessly, publicly challenging them year after year. And for nearly a decade, doors slammed in his face. But Johnson was patient. However, he continued, winning. By 1903, though Johnson's official record showed him with 9 wins against 3 losses, 5 draws and 2 no contests, he had won at least 50 fights against both white and black opponents. Johnson won his first title on February 3rd, 1903, beating Denver Ed Martin on points in a 20-round match for the World Colored Heavyweight Championship. Johnson held the title until it was vacated when he won the World Heavyweight title from Tommy Burns in Sydney, Australia, on Boxing Day, 1908. His reign of 2,151 days was the third longest in the 60-year-long history of the colored heavyweight title. Only Harry Wills at 3,103 days and Peter Jackson at 3,041 days held the title longer. A three-time colored heavyweight champion, Wills held the title for a total of 3,351 days. Johnson defended the colored heavyweight title 12 times, which was second only to the 26 times Wills defended the title. While colored champ, he defeated colored ex-champs Denver, Ed Martin, and Frank Childs again, and beat future colored heavyweight champs Sam McVeigh 3 times and Sam Langford once. He beat Langford on points in a 15-rounder and never gave him another shot at the title when he was either colored champ or the world heavyweight champ. Johnson had also fought Joe Jeanette, an American boxer considered one of the best heavyweight boxers of the early 20th century, a total of 7 times, all during his reign as colored champion, winning 4 times and drawing twice. 3 of the victories and 1 draw were newspaper decisions. In 1904, Johnson issued a challenge to James J. Jeffries, who held the world heavyweight title at the time. However, Jeffries refused to fight an African American and retired instead. Johnson would later fight former champion Bob Fitzsimmons in July 1907 and knocked him out in 2 rounds. And then came 1908 in the month of December the 26th in Sydney, Australia. Jack Johnson finally got to face the white champion, Tommy Burns, who had broken ranks and agreed to fight him. Johnson had followed Burns around the world for 2 years and taunted him in the press for a match. Burns would later on agree to fight Johnson only after promoters guaranteed him $30,000. Burns, who was 24 pounds lighter than the 192-pound Johnson, was practically put out on his feet in the 14th round when the police jumped into the ring and stopped the fight in front of over 20,000 spectators. And then, referee Hugh McIntosh awarded the championship to Johnson. Johnson would become the first black heavyweight champion of the world. And America, for a fact, felt greatly bruised. Newspapers fumed. Politicians raged. White supremacists panicked. Racial animosity among whites ran so deep that some, including renowned American author Jack London, called for a great white hope to take the title away from Johnson. Johnson heard the noise and he smiled. The man fought with a style that was infuriatingly intelligent. Instead of wild aggression, he employed defense, counterpunching, and psychological warfare. He would lean back, slip punches by inches, then punish opponents with calculated strikes. He spoke during fights, he mocked, he laughed. He dismantled not only bodies, but egos. As title holder, Johnson had to face a series of fighters, each billed by boxing promoters as a great white hope. He fought 2 exhibitions and 3 no decisions before meeting middleweight champ Stanley Ketchel on October 16, 1909. The 205 plus 1/2 pound Johnson knocked out the 170 plus 1/4 pound Ketchel in the 12th round with a devastating right to the jaw, one of the hardest blows ever delivered. 5 of the challenger's teeth were ripped off at the roots. Johnson can be seen on film removing them from his glove where they had been embedded. From 1908 to 1915, Johnson did more than just hold the title. He embodied a life of defiance. He would dress extravagantly in tailored suits. He wore diamond rings, drove flashy yellow sports cars and other imported automobiles. In an era when black men could be killed for perceived arrogance, Johnson reveled in visible success. He refused to keep a low profile in the face of criticism of his color and character, and instead took on an excessively flamboyant lifestyle. He even had a pet leopard, which he reputedly walked while sipping champagne, flaunted gold teeth that went with his gold-handled walking stick, and engaged in numerous overlapping romances with white women, all of whom he dated and married openly, a violation of racial codes that triggered fury. Anti-miscegenation laws were strictly enforced across much of the country. To this effect, white newspapers described Johnson as a menace. Johnson's relationship with American law enforcement was predictably tense. He was frequently arrested for minor infractions, speeding, disorderly conduct, or violating local segregation codes. Once speeding through a small town in America, Jack Johnson got pulled over for speeding. The cop wrote him a $50 ticket, but Johnson handed him a $100 bill, and the cop said, "I can't make change for that much. Keep it." Johnson replied, "I'll be making the return trip at the same speed." But Johnson's most public act of rebellion came on July 4th, 1910, in Reno, Nevada. Former champion James J. Jeffries emerged from retirement as the anointed Great White Hope, declaring he would prove white superiority. The fight was marketed as racial destiny. James Jeffries said he's going into this fight for the sole purpose of proving that a white man is better than a Negro. He had not fought in 6 years, and he also had to lose well over 100 pounds to get back to his championship fighting weight. Efforts to persuade Jeffries to retrieve the honor of the white race had begun immediately after the Bones-Johnson fight. On October 29, 1909, Johnson and Jeffries signed an agreement to box for the heavyweight championship of the world and called promoters to bid for the right to orchestrate the event. In early December 1909, Johnson and Jeffries selected a bid from the nation's top boxing promoters, Tex Rickard and John Gleason. The bid guaranteed a purse of $101,000, equivalent to $3,619,000 in 2025, to be divided 75% to the winner and 25% to the loser, as well as 2/3 of the revenues collected from the sales of the right to film the fight. Each boxer received 1/3 of the equity rights. Although it was well understood that a victory for Jeffries was likely to be more profitable than a victory for Johnson, there were no doubts that either way, the event would produce record profits. Legal historian Barak Orbach argues that in an industry that promoted events through the dramatization of rivalries, a championship contest between an iconic representative of the white race and the most notorious black fighter was a goldmine. Jeffries mostly remained hidden from media attention until the day of the fight, while Johnson soaked up the spotlight. Racial tension was brewing in the lead up to the fight, and to prevent any harm from coming to either boxer, guns were prohibited within the arena, along with the sale of alcohol and anyone who was under the effects of alcohol. Apples and all other potential weapons were barred. Behind the racial attitudes which were being instigated by the media was a major investment in gambling for the fight, with 10-7 odds in favor of Jeffries. The fight had taken place in front of 20,000 people at a ring which was built just for the occasion in downtown Reno, Nevada. Jeffries proved unable to impose his will on the younger champion, whereas Johnson, on the other hand, dominated the fight, dismantling Jeffries round after round. Johnson outclassed Jeffries, smiling, taunting, controlling the pace. By the 15th round, Jeffries collapsed. His corner stopped the fight. Afterwards, Jeffries was humbled by the loss and what he had seen of Johnson in their match. The fight of the century earned Johnson $65,000. That is over $2.2 million in 2025. And silenced the critics who had belittled Johnson's previous victory over Tommy Burns as empty. And as black communities erupted in celebration over the victory of one of their own, white mobs erupted in retaliation. Riots would explode in more than 25 cities all across the United States, from Texas and Colorado to New York and Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, New Orleans, Atlanta, St. Louis, Little Rock, and Houston. Johnson's victory over Jeffries had dashed white dreams of finding a great white hope to defeat him. Many whites felt humiliated by the defeat of Jeffries. Dozens were killed, and dozens more were injured. The federal government moved quickly to ban interstate distribution of fight films, fearing black Americans seeing Johnson's victory would inspire the unrest. A boxing match had become a political earthquake. The Johnson-Jeffries fight film received more public attention in the United States than any other film to date, and for the next 5 years, until the release of The Birth of a Nation. In the United States, many states and cities banned the exhibition of the Johnson-Jeffries film. The movement to censor Johnson's victory took over the country within 3 days after the fight. 2 weeks after the match, former President Theodore Roosevelt, an avid boxer and fan, wrote an article for The Outlook in which he supported banning not just moving pictures of boxing matches, but a complete ban on all prize fights in the US. He cited the crookedness and gambling that surrounded such contests, and that moving pictures have introduced a new method of money getting and of demoralization. Johnson's confidence did not soften. In 1912, he married Lucille Cameron, a white woman. Authorities pounced. When that case faltered, prosecutors pursued another woman, Belle Schreiber, under the Mann Act of 1910, a law designed to combat prostitution and human trafficking. On October 18, 1913, Johnson was convicted of transporting a woman across state lines for immoral purposes. The case was widely viewed as racially motivated. Countless white men had engaged in similar conduct without prosecution. Johnson was sentenced to 1 year and 1 day in prison. Rather than surrender, he fled the country in June 1913, beginning years of exile in Canada, Europe, and South America. He defended his title abroad, but lost it on April 5, 1915, in Havana, Cuba, to Jess Willard after 26 grueling rounds under a punishing sun. Some claimed he intentionally lost. Others said age and exhaustion caught him. What remained undeniable was that the symbolic damage he had inflicted on white supremacy could not be undone. In 1920, Johnson returned to the United States and surrendered. He served nearly 10 months at Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary. Even in prison, he refused invisibility. In several southern towns, police detained him for driving too fast in expensive cars. A black man flaunting wealth in defiance of racial expectations. These were not random encounters. They were reminders that no matter how hard he punched, the system was still determined to land blows of its own. To grasp Johnson's audacity, imagine a black man in 1910 refusing to step off the sidewalk, refusing to lower his eyes, refusing to pretend gratitude for second-class treatment. Imagine him laughing publicly at white opponents, marrying who he pleased, wearing silk and diamonds, traveling first class, in a time when black sharecroppers were trapped in debt peonage, when convict leasing re-enslaved thousands, when black schools received fractions of white funding, when lynch mobs operated with impunity. The Negro called Jack Johnson behaved as though none of those psychological shackles applied to him. He was flawed, yes. Complex, yes, but undeniably fearless. He forced America to confront a terrifying contradiction. If this black man could dominate the most celebrated white fighters in the world, what else might be possible? Sadly, on June 10th, 1946, Johnson died in a car accident in North Carolina after being refused service at a segregated diner. Even in death, the architecture of racism framed his final hours. But history moves. On May 24th, 2018, he was posthumously pardoned by the President of the United States, a symbolic gesture acknowledging the injustice of his conviction. The pardon mattered, but the lesson had been taught long before. Jack Johnson didn't march with banners. He did not draft legislation. He did not deliver soaring speeches. He smiled. He fought. He refused to bow. In doing so, he cracked open a psychological barrier decades before the civil rights movement. Before Martin Luther King Jr. dreamed aloud. Before Muhammad Ali declared himself the greatest. Before integration laws shifted. Johnson's gloves carried a message. Dignity is not granted. It is embodied. He taught America that power cannot permanently suppress truth. That excellence cannot be legislated out of existence. That sometimes the most revolutionary act is to stand in the center of hostility and grin. And so when we remember Jack Johnson, we do not merely remember a champion. We remember a man who walked through fire without lowering his gaze. A man who, in an era built on black repression, lived as though he were already free. That brings us to the end of yet another motivational story. Don't forget to support our works by hitting the thumbs up button before you share video with friends and families to keep spreading our eye-opening black narrative, and subscribe to stay tuned into the channel for more interesting updates if you haven't already. It's been a great delight having you with us on this journey of awareness and self-recovery. Thank you for watching.